Fake news, also known as junk news, pseudo news, or hoax news, is a form of news consisting of deliberate disinformation or hoaxes spread via traditional news media, print and broadcast, or online social media. Digital news has brought back and increased the usage of fake news, or yellow journalism. The news is then often reverberated as misinformation in social media, but occasionally finds its way to the mainstream media as well. Fake news is written and published usually with the intent to mislead in order to damage an agency, entity, or person, and/or gain financially or politically, often using sensationalist, dishonest, or outright fabricated headlines to increase readership. Similarly, clickbait stories and headlines earn advertising revenue from this activity. The relevance of fake news has increased in post-truth politics. For media outlets, the ability to attract viewers to their websites is necessary to generate online advertising revenue. Publishing a story with false content that attracts users, benefits advertisers and improves ratings. Easy access to online advertisement revenue, increased political polarization and the popularity of social media, primarily the Facebook news feed, have all been implicated in the spread of fake news, which competes with legitimate news stories. Hostile government actors have also been implicated in generating and propagating fake news, particularly during elections. Fake news undermines serious media coverage and makes it more difficult for journalists to cover significant news stories. An analysis by BuzzFeed found that the top 20 fake news stories about the 2016 U.S. presidential election received more engagement on Facebook than the top 20 election stories from 19 major media outlets. Anonymously hosted fake news websites lacking known publishers have also been criticized because they make it difficult to prosecute sources of fake news for libel. The term lying press is at times used to cast doubt upon legitimate news from an opposing political standpoint. During and after his presidential campaign and election, Donald Trump popularized the term fake news in this sense, regardless of the truthfulness of the news, when he used it to describe the negative press coverage of himself. In part, as a result of Trump's misuse, the term has come under increasing criticism, and in October 2018, the British government decided that it will no longer use the term because it is a poorly defined and misleading term that conflates a variety of false information, from genuine error through to foreign interference in democratic processes. Definition: fake news is a neologism often used to refer to fabricated news. This type of news, found in traditional news, social media or fake news websites, has no basis in fact, but is presented as being factually accurate. Michael Radutsky, a producer of CBS 60 Minutes, said his show considers fake news to be stories that are probably false, have enormous traction, popular appeal in the culture, and are consumed by millions of people. These stories are not only found in politics, but also in areas like vaccination, stock values and nutrition. He did not include news that is invoked by politicians against the media for stories that they don't like or for comments that they don't like as fake news. Guy Campanile, also a 60 Minutes producer, said, "What we are talking about are stories that are fabricated out of thin air. By most measures, deliberately, and by any definition, that's a lie." The intent and purpose of fake news is important. In some cases, what appears to be fake news may be news satire, which uses exaggeration and introduces non-factual elements that are intended to amuse or make a point, rather than to deceive. Propaganda can also be fake news. Some researchers have highlighted that fake news may be distinguished not just by the falsity of its content, but also the character of online circulation and reception. Claire Wardle of First Draft News identifies 7 types of fake news. Satire or parody, no intention to cause harm, but has potential to fool. False connection, when headlines, visuals or captions don't support the content. Misleading content, misleading use of information to frame an issue or an individual. False context, when genuine content is shared with false contextual information. Imposter content, when genuine sources are impersonated with false made-up sources. Manipulated content, when genuine information or imagery is manipulated to deceive, as with a doctored photo. Fabricated content, new content is 100% false, designed to deceive and do harm. In the context of the United States of America and its election processes in the 2010s, fake news generated considerable controversy and argument, with some commentators defining concern over it as moral panic or mass hysteria, and others worried about damage done to public trust. In January 2017, the United Kingdom House of Commons commenced a parliamentary inquiry into the growing phenomenon of fake news. Some, most notably United States President Donald Trump, have broadened the meaning of fake news to include news that was negative of his presidency. In November 2017, Claire Wardle, mentioned above, announced she has rejected the phrase fake news and censors it in conversation, finding it woefully inadequate to describe the issues. She now speaks of information pollution and distinguishes between three types of problems: misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. Misinformation: false information disseminated without harmful intent. Disinformation: created and shared by people with harmful intent. Malinformation: the sharing of genuine information with the intent to cause harm. Author Terry Pratchett, who had a background as a journalist and press officer, was among the first to be concerned about the spread of fake news on the internet. In a 1995 interview with Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft, he said, "Let's say I call myself the Institute for something or other, and I decide to promote a spurious treatise saying the Jews were entirely responsible for the Second World War and the Holocaust didn't happen, and it goes out there on the internet and is available on the same terms as any piece of historical research which has undergone peer review and so on. There's a kind of parity of esteem of information on the net. It's all there. There's no way of finding out whether this stuff has any bottom to it or whether someone has just made it up." Gates was optimistic and disagreed, saying that authorities on the net would index and check facts and reputations in a much more sophisticated way than in print. But it was Pratchett who had accurately predicted how the internet would propagate and legitimize fake news. Types. Here are a few examples of fake news and how they are viewed. Clickbait. Propaganda. Satire parody. Sloppy journalism. Misleading headings. Biased or slanted news. These are features of fake news and may help to identify and avoid instances of fake news. The International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, IFLA, published a summary in diagram form, pictured a trite, to assist people in recognizing fake news. Its main points are: consider the source to understand its mission and purpose. Read beyond the headline to understand the whole story. Check the authors to see if they are real and credible. Assess the supporting sources to ensure they support the claims. Check the date of publication to see if the story is relevant and up to date. Ask if it is a joke to determine if it is meant to be satire. Review your own biases to see if they are affecting your judgment. Ask experts to get confirmation from independent people with knowledge. The International Fact-Checking Network, IFCN, launched in 2015, supports international collaborative efforts in fact-checking, provides training, and has published a code of principles. In 2017, it introduced an application and vetting process for journalistic organizations. One of IFCN's verified signatories, the independent, not-for-profit media journal The Conversation, created a short animation explaining its fact-checking process, which involves extra checks and balances, including blind peer review by a second academic expert, additional scrutiny and editorial oversight. Beginning in the 2017 school year, children in Taiwan study a new curriculum designed to teach critical reading of propaganda and the evaluation of sources. Called Media Literacy, the course provides training in journalism in the new information society. Detecting fake news online. Fake news has become increasingly prevalent over the last few years, with over 100 incorrect articles and rumors spread incessantly, just with regard to the 2016 United States presidential election. These fake news articles tend to come from satirical news websites or individual websites with an incentive to propagate false information, either as clickbait or to serve a purpose. Since they typically hope to intentionally promote incorrect information, such articles are quite difficult to detect. When identifying a source of information, one must look at many attributes, including but not limited to the content of the email and social media engagements. Specifically, the language is typically more inflammatory in fake news than real articles, in part because the purpose is to confuse and generate clicks. Furthermore, modeling techniques such as n-gram encodings and bag of words have served as other linguistic techniques to determine the legitimacy of a news source. On top of that, researchers have determined that visual-based cues also play a factor in categorizing an article. Specifically, some features can be designed to assess if a picture was legitimate and provides more clarity on the news. There is also many social context features that can play a role, as well as the model of spreading the news. Websites such as Snopes try to detect this information manually, while certain universities are trying to build mathematical models to do this themselves. History. Ancient. In the 13th century BC, Ramesses the Great spread lies and propaganda, portraying the Battle of Kadesh as a stunning victory for the Egyptians. He depicted scenes of himself smiting his foes during the battle on the walls of nearly all his temples. The treaty between the Egyptians and the Hittites, however, reveals that the battle was actually a stalemate. During the 1st century BC, Octavian ran a campaign of misinformation against his rival Mark Antony, portraying him as a drunkard, a womanizer, and a mere puppet of the Egyptian queen Cleopatra VII. He published a document purporting to be Mark Antony's will, which claimed that Mark Antony, upon his death, wished to be entombed in the mausoleum of the Ptolemaic pharaohs. Although the document may have been forged, it invoked outrage from the Roman populace. Mark Antony ultimately killed himself after his defeat in the Battle of Actium, upon hearing false rumors propagated by Cleopatra herself, claiming that she had committed suicide. During the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, false rumors were spread about Christians, claiming that they engaged in ritual cannibalism and incest. In the late 3rd century AD, the Christian apologist Lactantius invented and exaggerated stories about pagans engaging in acts of immorality and cruelty, while the anti-Christian writer Porphyry invented similar stories about Christians. Medieval. In 1475, a fake news story in Trent claimed that the Jewish community had murdered a 2.5-year-old Christian infant named Simonino. The story resulted in all the Jews in the city being arrested and tortured. 15 of them were burned at the stake. Pope Sixtus IV himself attempted to stamp out the story, however, by that point, it had already spread beyond anyone's control. Stories of this kind were known as blood libel. They claimed that Jews purposely killed Christians, especially Christian children, and used their blood for religious or ritual purposes. Early modern period. After the invention of the printing press in 1439, publications became widespread, but there was no standard of journalistic ethics to follow. By the 17th century, historians began the practice of citing their sources in footnotes. In 1610, when Galileo went on trial, the demand for verifiable news increased. During the 18th century, publishers of fake news were fined and banned in the Netherlands. One man, Gerard Lodewijk van der Macht, was banned 4 times by Dutch authorities, and 4 times he moved and restarted his press. In the American colonies, Benjamin Franklin wrote fake news about murderous scalping Indians working with King George III in an effort to sway public opinion in favor of the American Revolution. Canards, the successors of the 16th century pasquinade, were sold in Paris on the street for 2 centuries, starting in the 17th century. In 1793, Marie Antoinette was executed in part because of popular hatred engendered by a canard on which her face had been printed. During the era of slave owning in the United States, supporters of slavery propagated fake news stories about African Americans, whom white people considered to have lower status. Violence occurred in reaction to the spread of some fake news events. In one instance, stories of African Americans spontaneously turning white spread through the South and struck fear into the hearts of many people. Rumors and anxieties about slave rebellions were common in Virginia from the beginning of the colonial period, despite the only major uprising occurring in the 19th century. One particular instance of fake news regarding revolts occurred in 1730. The serving governor of Virginia at the time, Governor William Gooch, reported that a slave rebellion had occurred but was effectively put down, although this never happened. After Gooch discovered the falsehood, he ordered slaves found off plantations to be punished, tortured, and made prisoners. One instance of fake news was the Great Moon Hoax of 1835. The New York Sun published articles about a real-life astronomer and a made-up colleague who, according to the hoax, had observed bizarre life on the moon. The fictionalized articles successfully attracted new subscribers, and the penny paper suffered very little backlash after it admitted the next month that the series had been a hoax. Such stories were intended to entertain readers and not to mislead them. From 1800 to 1810, James Cheetham made use of fictional stories to advocate politically against Aaron Burr. His stories were often defamatory, and he was frequently sued for libel. Yellow journalism peaked in the mid-1890s, characterizing the sensationalist journalism that arose in the circulation war between Joseph Pulitzer's New York World and William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal. Pulitzer and other yellow journalism publishers goaded the United States into the Spanish-American War, which was precipitated when the USS Maine exploded in the harbor of Havana, Cuba. How fake news spreads and goes viral. Fake news has the tendency to become viral among the public. With the presence of social media platforms like Twitter, it becomes easier for false information to diffuse quickly. Research has found that false political information tends to spread 3 times faster than other false news. On Twitter, false tweets have a much higher chance of being retweeted than truthful tweets. More so, it is humans who are responsible in disseminating false news and information, as opposed to bots and click farms. The tendency for humans to spread false information has to do with human behavior. According to research, humans are attracted to events and information that are surprising and new, and, as a result, causes high arousal in the brain. This ultimately leads humans to retweet or share false information, which are usually characterized with clickbait and eye-catching titles. This prevents people from stopping to verify the information. As a result, massive online communities form around a piece of false news without any prior fact-checking or verification of the veracity of the information. Popularity of fake news. Fake news has gained lots of popularity with various media outlets and platforms. Researchers at Pew Research Center discovered that over 60% of Americans access news through social media, compared to traditional newspaper and magazines. With the popularity of social media, individuals can easily access fake news or similar content. One study looks at the number of fake news articles being accessed by viewers in 2016 and found that each individual was exposed to at least one or more fake news articles daily. Citation needed. As a result, fake news is omnipresent among the viewer population and results in its ability to spread across the internet.